Guess what? Carney's consultation for automatic tax filing was a sham. Okay, and let me explain why.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that you always have to keep an eye out for is when the government tries to be helpful, because it's usually not helpful. And in the Liberals' cases, there's probably some ulterior motive behind it. And this was highlighted recently by the Canadian Taxpayer Federation when the government announced that it wanted to look at automatically filing your taxes for you. So joining us to talk about that is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, Franco Terrazono. Franco, welcome back to Northern Perspective.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Okay, so we saw your social media drop on this. What the heck is going on, to paraphrase Larry Brock, in terms of the government wanting to help out in automatically filing our taxes for us?
Yeah, what's the scariest sentence in the English language? I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? And look, we should be highly skeptical of this. So essentially, since about 2020, the government has been musing about expanding the power of the CRA over taxpayers with automatic tax filing, right? So I think the Trudeau government first started musing about it in 2020. We've seen the government continue to expand the power. In fact, in last year's fall economic statement, really the last budget we even had the government instruct the CRA to start exploring expanding automatic tax filing to middle class Canadians. And what Carney just announced is, again, an expansion of the CRA. They're going to start rolling this out or continue to roll this out to more modest income Canadians. But look, automatic tax filing is a massive expansion in the power of the CRA. And at the end of the day, expect your bill to go up, your tax bill to go up, if the government keeps giving the CRA more power over taxpayers.
So one of the questions that I see is other countries use this method for their taxes. What's the problem with Canada using it?
Well, I'm happy to dive into some other countries, but I also just want to point out, let's focus on the challenges here in Canada, right? And there's two issues here in Canada that we have to address with respect to the CRA. Number one, the CRA can barely do the job that it has now. In fact, the government, even the Liberal government, where you had the finance minister, Champagne, acknowledge that the challenges plaguing the CRA are, quote, unacceptable, right? And let's go back to the last Auditor General report. And what did that report find? Well, the CRA only answered about 36% of the phone calls that it received. It picked up the phone 36% of the time. And when Canadians were finally able to get someone with a heartbeat on the line, Canadians got the wrong information about 30% of the time. So the CRA can barely pick up the phone, and now the government wants to expand its power over taxpayers with automatic tax filing? It makes no sense. And the second issue here in Canada is the massive increase in the federal bureaucracy. And guess what? The CRA is no different, right? We've seen a massive increase in the bloat at the CRA. Think about it this way. In Canada, we have one CRA bureaucrat for every 800 Canadians. In the United States, there's one IRS bureaucrat for every 3,800 Americans.
Yeah, so it's a factor of over 6 times the amount of bureaucrats for every taxpayer Canadian in Canada, and I think that's reflected in our budget. Now, one of the things I always look at when making decisions at a corporate level is what problem are we trying to solve behind those decisions. So a decision as massive as this, do you know what problem they're trying to solve? Have they said what problem they're trying to solve?
Well, yeah, here's what they say. I don't think this is really the reason behind it, but here's what they say, and let's refute that, okay? So what they say is it'll make it easier for people to tax file who aren't filing their taxes already. But hold on a second. Everyone knows the solution. Everyone knows the solution, okay? If you want to make tax filing simpler, make the tax code simpler, right? Instead of having essentially a tax code that's almost as long as the entire Harry Potter series, How about we simplify the tax code, right? Set income tax rates nice and low, take away, different types of deductions, subsidies, things of that nature, and just set the tax rates low. We don't have to read the entire Harry Potter series to be able to file our taxes. And in fact, when you see that the CRA is giving out the wrong information about 30% of the time, it shows that on both ends of the phone, nobody knows what's going on. Okay, but let's poke holes in the government's own rationale. So number one, the solution already exists, okay, and it's outside of government, and you could do it privately, right? There are free voluntary tax clinics that you can go to if you have modest income and you have a simple tax situation. But number two, folks, after the show, just do a quick Google search, free automatic tax filing through industry, and you'll get many different businesses that already offer free automatic or free tax filing services that you don't even have to pay for if you have a simple solution, right? So the solutions are already there. They're already outside of government. And let me just address one more thing, right? Because if we're talking about people who are struggling the most in society, right? Think about, the really hard times facing someone who is homeless, maybe living on East Hastings, for example. Well, in many cases, the government doesn't know who they are. The government doesn't have information. And a lot of times these people don't have bank accounts, phones, or computers. So what are we talking about with automatic tax filing? This isn't a solution.
Well, and one of the, I guess, devil's advocate points that I've heard on this, and you can let me know what you think, I know what I think, is, well, what's the big deal? Because after you file your way anyway, the CRA will double check that anyway, and they're reviewing it anyway. So what's the difference? Isn't just this cutting out a step?
Okay, there's two issues. So number one, and this is the biggest issue with automatic tax filing and giving the government more power over taxpayers. We've already mentioned the fact that the CRA can barely answer the phone, and now you want to give them more power. We've already answered the fact that the CRA is already a bloated arm of the federal government, and this would mean more bureaucrats in Ottawa paid for by taxpayers. But the biggest issue is that the CRA acting as both tax filer and tax collector is a serious conflict of interest, right? As a Canadian taxpayer, you want to keep as much of your own money as you can. The government wants to take as much money from you as it can, especially when it's more than $1 trillion in debt. So who do you think is going to win that power struggle if the tax filing process gets taken over by the CRA, right? Expect your tax bill to go up. But not only that, you guys mentioned the experience in other countries. Well, let's look at the British experience, because I hear this thrown out all the time, right? Well, in 2010, 6 million taxpayers received incorrect returns from Britain's tax agency, right? 6 million. Okay, guess what? 3/4 or 3/4 of those returns overbilled taxpayers. Right? This is such common sense. And then the problem goes back. What happens when the CRA inevitably overbills you? What happens? Well, good luck getting the CRA on the phone to fix that.
Well, and you'll never know, right? Because the point of this is, well, you just trust the government. So you now don't really have a point of reference. You then are in this position of, if you want to look at challenging that, guess what? You have to go and have somebody do your taxes again anyway in order to actually challenge that. And I think, and this comes back to my argument, it's less likely that the government is going to come back and saying you owe more money if you've already filed that and had somebody double check that, because now they already have a point of reference to compare their notice of assessment to. So it's less likely they're going to come back and do that. But I think the point that you raised with Britain is very, very relevant, because this just sets the stage for the government to be able to say, no refunds for anybody this year. Sorry. That's just how our calculations worked out. And it makes you wonder, is this just another way for the government, because they're now up to $100 billion in a deficit this year? Is this another way for them to try and figure out how to get more money in their coffers?
This is the big concern, right? This is the big concern. And before anyone throws out, conspiracy, blah, blah, blah. No, just look at the government's own fiscal update from last year, essentially the last budget that we've received. it says right in there that the government wants to start expanding automatic tax filing to middle class Canadians. Right? This is how it always works, right? The government gets the foot in the door and then they keep cranking up their own power over taxpayers. And again, the solution is right in front of everyone. Everyone knows what the solution is, and that's just simplify the tax code so people don't need, like 3 PhDs in economics and the time to go through the entire Harry Potter series to figure out what's going on with the income tax code, right? Like simplify the tax system. And again, like here's what I always kind of say as well is like if you want to address the problem, for example, let's say you want to renovate your kitchen, right? Well, you don't tear down your whole house and then rebuild from scratch. Right. If there are issues, well, you shouldn't. Right. Like, so if the issue is that tax filing is too complicated, make the tax code more simpler. And there's already solutions. There's free services through community tax clinics, but also through industry where there's free products that you can use to file your taxes. So what are we talking about here?
Well, and the other thing, and this is where it gets really serious, that really sticks in my head is this not a case of moving away from no taxation without representation? Because if the tax man is the one that's actually doing your taxes for you, then are you actually being represented when they're evaluating your tax bill?
I haven't even thought, and that never even came to my mind. So that's another good question mark there. Of course, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, that's like one of the key things that we're fighting is no taxation without representation. I mean, we've been on this show a couple times before talking about how we took the CRA to court in the past when those unelected bureaucrats try to grab billions of dollars from Canadians through the undemocratic and illegal capital gains tax increase. There's another thing that comes to mind here, and I haven't seen it discussed much. So we talked about how big the bureaucracy of the CRA is, right? Where they have more than 50,000 employees, where they added about 13,000 extra government bureaucrats over the last 10 years, and yet they're still struggling. But folks, what happens the next time union negotiations come around, right? What happens if the CRA already has all this power over taxpayers through automatic tax filing? Well, I think I know what happens the next time union negotiations come around. The same thing that happened the last time, where in 2023, the CRA union, they went on strike right during tax season. And they even declined to extend the tax deadline. Right. So do you see what automatic tax filing, not just adding more bureaucrats, but giving them more power over taxpayers? The next time the union bosses want to negotiate a pay raise from taxpayers, well, that's a good time for them to go on strike right during tax season.
Yeah. And it grinds the system even more to a halt than it already is. And this is the issue that we're seeing as a result of the bureaucracy growing by 40%. Carney saying he wants to now shrink it, but how are you going to shrink it, but then introduce more functionality and more quote unquote capability to a division, one of the largest divisions in the government, without hiring more people? It's a contradiction in terms, is it not?
Well, Ryan, and probably more than most people, like how government works, right? Like if the government wants to do this massive expansion of automatic tax filing, they're going to have to hire a whole bunch of more government employees, right? And this is like already the biggest issue with the budget. Ryan, you mentioned like we could be looking at the government borrowing close to $100 billion this year. Like, guess what, folks? The government is broke, okay? It's not just the debt. It's also interest charges on the debt, where it's costing us more than $1 billion every week just to pay interest on the debt. Well, what's $1 billion every week? That's a brand new hospital that is not getting built because that money is going to the bond fund managers on Bay Street just to pay interest on the Carney government's credit card. But not just that, right? Let's put it in simpler terms. It also means that the government is taking $1,300 from each Canadian this year just to pay interest on the debt. And now Carney's musing about hiring more CRA bureaucrats in Ottawa that taxpayers have to pay for.
The other aspect of this is something that was really concerning, where it was found that there's been a bunch of breaches and accounts hacked on the CRA website. So your infrastructure isn't even secure from a cybersecurity perspective, and you want to add more automated functionality into that. Well, what happens if these accounts become hacked and compromised and the account numbers get changed and all of these quote unquote refunds start automatically going to somebody else? And you, as John Q. Canadian, you may just assume, okay, well, I guess I didn't get a refund or something. And that's going to be the biggest issue in this, is they're not ready. And all I hear thrown around in government is, oh, well, AI. You are nowhere near to be having the capabilities of introducing AI into almost any government system because you're so far behind. I know, I was there.
Right. The government can't even pay its own employees properly, right? Without costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars more, right? The government can't even launch a simple app without completely ballooning the cost. Like, remember, this is the same government that took an $80,000 app, ArriveCan, and ballooned the cost to $60 million. And now the government is talking about, expanding automatic tax filing. Like, come on, right, folks? Like, the government can't even do its most simplest job of answering the phone. It can't even create a simple app without ballooning the tab, soaking us for $60 million. And the government can't even pay its own employees properly. So not only is this a huge power grab by the CRA, by the government over taxpayers, but like, I think just look at recent history, and Canadians have every reason to believe that this is going to be a disaster.
So you're right. This does sound like a disaster. What is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation planning to do, and what can Canadians do about this?
Oh, well, we're going to keep going 100% against this. The best way that you can join the fight, join the taxpayer army, is head over to taxpayer.com. We've got a petition there. No automatic tax filing. Sign that. You'll get our email action updates, and we're taking a ton of action here. And I think it's really time to fight. Guys, can I just add one more thing here that we haven't touched on that I think is actually really important? And it goes to the consultation. Because government does consultation on many different things, including automatic tax filing, but also the real big stuff like the budget. Well, guess what? Carney's consultation for automatic tax filing was a sham. Okay, and let me explain why. The government gave Canadians until Thursday, October the 9th, to send in an email or survey submission about automatic tax filing. Hours later, the next morning, Friday, October the 10th, Carney makes this announcement. Well, guess what? There is no way that these government bureaucrats pulled an all-nighter going through thousands of email and survey submissions before sending Carney out the next morning, hours later, to make this announcement. All right? So, like, asking Canadians for our opinion and then ignoring Canadians is an awful look for Mr. Carney, but even more to the point, it makes it look like government consultations are just a sham.
And that's a really important point. And I think it's just part and parcel for this Carney government. They say one thing, but then do another. And it's always a bait and switch with these folks. So, folks, if you are concerned about this, head over to taxpayer.com, follow Franco and Chris and all the rest of the folks on social media. They are constantly putting out great information for Canadians. It's free. They don't charge you any money to actually get this information. And we need to take a really strong stance against this and any further government overreach. Franco, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thank you guys. It was my pleasure.